My name is John Anderson. I'm 47 years old, divorced, with 2 kids in college I barely get to see. For the past 20 years, I've worked as a night security guard at various locations around the city. The job suits me. I've always been a night owl, and I prefer the quiet solitude to dealing with crowds of people. At least, that's what I used to think before what happened at the Westview Medical Research Facility. I started working there about 6 months ago. It was a significant step up from my previous position at the shopping mall. Better pay, better benefits, and most importantly, it seemed easier. The facility was mostly automated, with state-of-the-art security systems that practically ran themselves. My job was essentially to be present in case of system failures and to do hourly rounds through the 4-story building. The facility was located on the outskirts of town, surrounded by woods on 3 sides. During the day, it was staffed by about 50 researchers and administrative personnel, but at night, it was just me. The scientists occasionally worked late, but they rarely stayed past 9, and they needed special clearance to be in the building after hours. For the first few months, everything was perfectly normal. Boring even. I'd arrive at 10 p.m., check in with the day shift guard, make my rounds every hour, and spend the rest of the time watching shows on my tablet or reading. The building had that sterile feel that all medical facilities have. Bright fluorescent lights, squeaky clean floors, and the faint smell of disinfectant. The only part of my rounds that ever made me slightly uneasy was the basement level. Unlike the rest of the building, which was all gleaming white surfaces and glass walls, the basement housed older labs that hadn't been renovated. The lights down there were dimmer, and some of them flickered intermittently. There were exposed pipes running along the ceilings, and the narrow hallways created blind corners that always made me a little tense as I approached them. About 3 months into the job, I began noticing small, odd occurrences during my shifts. Nothing alarming at first, just things slightly out of place from how I remembered them. A chair that I was certain had been pushed in would be pulled out from a desk. A door I thought I had closed would be open a crack. I chalked it up to my middle-aged memory playing tricks on me. Then one night in late October, during my 2 a.m. round, I heard something that didn't belong. I was on the 3rd floor, passing by one of the microbiology labs, when I distinctly heard the sound of glass clinking against glass, like someone handling laboratory equipment. I froze, listening intently, and heard it again, followed by what sounded like a drawer sliding shut. Protocol dictated that I call for backup if I suspected an intrusion, but I'd been doing this job long enough to know that would be an overreaction. Probably just a researcher who had stayed late and forgotten to sign in. It had happened before. I approached the lab door, which had a narrow vertical window, and peered inside. The lab was dark except for a single light over one of the workstations in the far corner. I could make out a figure hunched over the counter, but couldn't see clearly who it was. I knocked firmly on the door. "Security," I called out. "Need to see your ID and after-hours authorization." The figure didn't respond or turn around. They remained perfectly still, as if frozen in place. I knocked again, louder this time, but still no response. Sighing, I used my keycard to unlock the door and stepped inside, hand resting on my radio just in case. "Excuse me," I said as I approached, my footsteps echoing in the quiet lab. "You need to show me your—" I stopped mid-sentence as the figure finally turned around. It was Dr. Patel, one of the senior researchers I recognized from my check-in procedures. But something was terribly wrong. His normally warm brown skin had a gray, waxy appearance, and his eyes were bloodshot to the point of being almost entirely red. Most disturbing of all, he was wearing the same clothes I had seen him in 2 days ago, now wrinkled and stained with something dark. "Dr. Patel?" I said cautiously. "Are you all right, sir?" He stared at me for a long moment, his expression blank. Then his lips parted in what might have been an attempt at a smile, but looked more like a grimace. "Still working," he said, his voice hoarse and raspy, as if he hadn't used it in days. "Important breakthrough. Can't stop now." I glanced at the workstation behind him. There were several Petri dishes laid out, filled with what looked like dark, viscous cultures. Next to them was a row of syringes filled with the same substance. None of it looked like the typical clean clinical materials I usually saw in the labs. "Sir, I don't see your after-hours badge," I said, trying to keep my voice level despite the growing unease I felt. "And I'm not seeing you on tonight's authorization list. I'm going to have to ask you to pack up and come with me to sign out properly." Dr. Patel's expression didn't change. "Just a few more minutes," he said in that same rasping voice. "You should go now. Finish your rounds. I'll be gone when you come back." Something about the way he said it sent a chill down my spine. In my 20 years as a security guard, I'd developed a pretty good instinct for when something wasn't right, and every alarm bell in my head was ringing. But I was also aware of the hierarchy at play. Dr. Patel was high up in the company, and I was just a security guard. Causing a scene could cost me my job if I was overreacting. "I'll need to report this," I said firmly, "and I'll be back in 15 minutes to make sure you're wrapping up." "Those are the rules, sir." Dr. Patel turned back to his work without acknowledging me. I hesitated for a moment longer, then backed out of the lab, making sure the door closed behind me. As soon as I was in the hallway, I called my supervisor's emergency line and left a detailed message about finding Dr. Patel working after hours without authorization. I continued my rounds, but I couldn't shake the feeling of wrongness that had settled over me. When I returned to the third-floor lab 15 minutes later, it was dark and empty. There was no sign of Dr. Patel or the materials he had been working with. Even the light that had been on in the corner was now off. I used my key card to enter the lab and check the workstation where he had been standing. The counter was spotlessly clean. No petri dishes, no syringes, nothing out of place at all. If I hadn't seen it with my own eyes, I would have thought I imagined the whole thing. The next night, my supervisor called me before my shift. She told me that according to the company records, Dr. Patel had called in sick 3 days ago and hadn't been to the facility since. When they tried to contact him at home, there was no answer. They were sending someone to check on him, but in the meantime, she wanted me to be extra vigilant and report anything unusual immediately. That night, I couldn't help feeling on edge. Every shadow seemed deeper, every sound more significant. I found myself avoiding the third floor during my early rounds, saving it for last each time. Around 3 a.m., as I finally forced myself to check the floor, I noticed something odd. The temperature seemed to drop noticeably as I stepped out of the stairwell. My breath fogged slightly in front of me, despite the building's normally reliable climate control. As I walked down the corridor toward the lab where I'd seen Dr. Patel, I heard that same sound again, glass clinking against glass. This time, it was coming from a different lab, 2 doors down from the previous one. My first instinct was to call for backup immediately, but a part of me needed to confirm what I was hearing first. I approached cautiously and looked through the window in the door. The lab was dark, but as my eyes adjusted, I could make out not one but 3 figures moving around inside. They were dressed in lab coats, working silently at different stations. One of them was unmistakably Dr. Patel. I backed away from the door, my heart pounding. This time, I didn't hesitate. I called for backup and then contacted my supervisor directly, waking her up to explain the situation. She instructed me to stay out of sight, keep watching the lab from a distance, and wait for the response team, which would arrive in about 20 minutes. Those were the longest 20 minutes of my life. I positioned myself around a corner where I could see the lab door without being immediately visible to anyone exiting it. The entire time, I kept expecting the door to open, for those figures to emerge and discover me. But the door remained closed, and the only sound was the occasional clink of glass from within. When the response team finally arrived, 2 police officers and the facility's head of security, I led them to the lab. But when the head of security unlocked the door and we entered, the lab was empty and immaculate, just like the night before. The officers searched the entire floor, but found nothing. No sign of intrusion, no evidence that anyone had been there at all. The head of security reviewed the badge access logs right there on his tablet, confirming that besides the 4 of us, no one had accessed the 3rd floor since the researchers left at 7 p.m. I could tell they didn't believe me. The older officer suggested I might have dozed off and dreamed it, while the younger one exchanged knowing glances with the head of security, clearly thinking I was making things up for attention or to cover for some mistake on my part. After they left, I was instructed to complete my shift as normal. My supervisor said we would discuss the incident the following day, her tone making it clear that the discussion wouldn't be pleasant. For the remainder of that night, nothing unusual happened. No sounds, no sightings, nothing out of place. By the time my replacement arrived at 6 a.m., I had almost convinced myself that maybe I had imagined it all, a hallucination brought on by stress or lack of sleep. As I was leaving the building, my phone rang. It was my supervisor again, her voice tense. "John, where are you right now?" "Just leaving the facility," I replied. "What's going on?" "Go straight home and stay there," she said. "The police are going to want to talk to you later today." "Why? What happened?" There was a pause before she answered. "They found Dr. Patel this morning. He's been dead for at least 3 days. In his home." I felt my blood run cold. "That's impossible. I saw him last night and the night before." "No, John," she said firmly. "You couldn't have. Just go home and wait for the police to contact you." I did as she instructed, driving home in a daze of confusion and fear. When I arrived at my apartment, I immediately turned on the local news. The lead story was about an apparent suicide at the Westview Medical Research Facility. A lab technician had been found hanging in one of the third-floor bathrooms, discovered by the morning cleaning staff. They didn't release the name, but they showed a photo of the building with police cars parked outside, right in front of the entrance to the third floor. The police interviewed me that afternoon. They asked detailed questions about my movements during the night, whether I had checked the bathrooms during my rounds. I had, including the one where the body was found, and it had been empty, and whether I had seen or heard anything unusual. I told them everything, including my sightings of Dr. Patel and the 3 figures in the lab. They listened politely, but I could tell they didn't believe me. One detective made a note about having me drug tested. They were clearly working on the theory that either I had somehow missed seeing a suicide take place during my shift, or worse, that I had something to do with it. I was placed on administrative leave pending investigation. 3 days later, my supervisor called to inform me that my services would no longer be required at the facility. The official reason was failure to maintain adequate security protocols. But the implication was clear. They thought I was either incompetent or involved in something sinister. It's been 2 months since then. I've managed to find another security job at a warehouse across town. The hours are worse, the pay is lower, and my coworkers avoid me. Word gets around in the security community, and everyone's heard some version of what happened at Westview. But that's not why I'm sharing this story. I'm sharing it because last week, I was grocery shopping when I saw him, Dr. Patel, pushing a cart down the cereal aisle. He looked perfectly normal, healthy even, nothing like the gray-skinned figure I'd encountered in the lab. He was with a woman I assumed was his wife and a young boy. I froze in place, watching them. Dr. Patel glanced in my direction, and for a brief moment our eyes met. There was no recognition in his face, just the polite acknowledgement strangers give each other in public places. But as he turned away, I caught something, a slight, unnatural stiffness in his movements, and what looked like a dark stain peeking out from under the collar of his shirt. Since then, I've seen 2 more people from the research facility around town, a receptionist I used to greet every evening and one of the janitorial staff. Both of them looked normal at first glance, but both had that same unnatural stiffness, the same blank eyes when you looked closely. Yesterday, I drove past the facility out of morbid curiosity. There was a new sign out front. The Westview Medical Research Facility is now the Westview Center for Infectious Disease Control. According to the local paper, they're doing important work on rapid response to emerging pathogenic threats. The article mentioned they're expanding, hiring new staff, and quoted their Director of Community Relations, Dr. Patel, who assured the public that their work would benefit everyone in the city, and that soon they would be reaching out to residents about participating in their community health initiative. I've already put in for a transfer to another city. If my application is approved, I'll be gone by the end of the month. If not, well, I've started keeping a journal of everything I've seen, everyone I've recognized who shouldn't be walking around. I'm making copies and sending them to people I trust outside of town, because whatever's happening at Westview, whatever's wearing Dr. Patel's face and the faces of others from that facility, I don't think it's going to stay contained for long, and I don't think I'm the only one who has noticed. If you live in my city and you're offered a chance to participate in any kind of medical study or community health initiative in the coming months, my advice is simple. Run. Run as far and as fast as you can, because what I saw in that lab wasn't human, and I think it's spreading.